we just got out of our screening last night around like 10 o'clock. So I've had about a full 24 hours to sit on it. And I gotta say, after I initially got done with the film, I kind of sat there in my seat for a second, and I really thought about how the film stacked up to Into the Spider-Verse. One of the things that really caught my attention was the fact that it really does feel like they had a consistent tone all throughout the whole filmmaking process. And it's cohesive in terms of where we go in Miles Morales' story. It's cohesive in terms of the animation itself, right? The animation in Miles' universe and the animation that we get through all these other characters. So if you aren't familiar with, where Across the Spider-Verse picks up in the story, it takes place around a year after the events of Into the Spider-Verse. So Miles Morales reunites with Gwen Stacy, Brooklyn's full-time friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, who is catapulted across the multiverse, where he encounters a team of spider people charged with protecting its very existence. However, the heroes clash on how to handle a new threat, and Miles finds himself pitted against other Spider-Men and Spider people. He must soon redefine what it means to be a hero so that he can save the people he loves the most. And I think that's the most accurate kind of synopsis that I've seen for this movie, because it really is down to Miles' personal journey. And while we got a lot of that in Into the Spider-Verse, one of the things that I love the most, we build upon that. We kind of take a new approach in terms of the storytelling and kind of the tone, the overall tone of the film. It's a little bit darker. It's certainly not as funny. There are parts that are really, really funny, but the intent isn't always to be funny. And that's one of the things that I came to really appreciate about this particular film. We get more of Gwen Stacy's story, actually. And Haley Steinfeld does a really amazing job here at her voice acting and also just portraying the internal conflict that character is going through. Her and Miles are very similar in terms of the track that they're on with their family and their friends, and just the life that they're living. I talked about their friends, but do they really even have any friends? What does that mean to be a hero and to have friends? And that's something that this movie kind of juggles with. So Phil Lord and Chris Miller are back as the writers of Across the Spider-Verse. And then you have Joaquim Dos Santos, Kemp Powers, and Justin K. Thompson in the director's seat. Fun tidbit on the Into the Burrow podcast on Monday, we're going to be talking about why animation often has multiple directors. It's really fascinating to kind of get into the history of why there are so many cooks in the kitchen when it comes to animation, but there's a very, very good reason for it. Nonetheless, like I had mentioned earlier, stylistically, it feels very reminiscent of Into the Spider-Verse, but it feels like an expansion. It feels like an expansion of Miles Morales' story, but also Gwen's story. And, while the other characters that we came to love in the last movie from 2018 are here, I'm not going to give anything away in terms of plot and where we go in the story, but I will say that, you feel their presence even when they're not on screen, and the lessons that Miles Morales had learned from them are on full display in this one. Now, one of the things that I think that this movie has working against it is the fact that essentially we're probably going to get a third movie. And so what does that mean? Well, where they end up in this movie isn't entirely satisfying for a whole lot of people. For the vast majority of people, it's going to be a very satisfying experience from beginning to end. Even for me, it is. But I can acknowledge that because we're telling this story across 3 films, there's going to be a little bit of a lag on where we leave in this one, in between, what the audience members are feeling and where the story is ultimately going. And so it's my hope. I've heard rumblings that they're talking about, Beyond the Spider-Verse, which is going to be the third film in this franchise, releasing sometime in March, or at least in the first quarter of 2024. So we don't have that long to wait, and it would make sense, right? Because if you remember, Lord and Miller, the writers here, not that long, after the CinemaCon in 2022, hired on 100 more animators or some ridiculous number like that to finish the story. And I have to imagine that not only did they hire those writers to really help with the process of finishing this project, but also probably to start working and start production on the next one as they were doing it. We've seen multiple, examples of filmmakers shooting things back to back just for the sake of consistency. One of the things I had read, actually, Bill Hader and Barry talked about how he went from writing the third season and fourth season together to then when he was shooting the third season, he went back and rewrote part of season 4 to make it a little bit more cohesive as to what he was doing at that time. So it's definitely not unheard of to have plans in development as you're finishing a project, right? And so that gives me hope for a potential smooth transition between the second and third film in this particular franchise. But I think overall, it was a really satisfying experience. It can be a lot. It can be a lot just with the music, which, by the way, the music in this film, I wasn't quite sure how they were going to outdo themselves, because if you know me, one of my favorite songs in the last decade probably is Sunflower. And I was like, every time I hear that song, I think of Into the Spider-Verse, and I think of that first initial experience of watching this animation for the first time on a screen. And so I was like, how are they going to top that? How are they going to do better than the first? And let me tell you, they did. It's moodier. It's way more intricate in terms of what it's doing in tandem with the story that's playing out on screen, which is something that I was really looking forward to, just because when you're trying to tell a cohesive story, you want everything to kind of click together, right? You want your music and your score and the soundtrack to blend in with what we're seeing as viewers on screen, and I think they were able to accomplish it tenfold here. I think they did, I wouldn't say better necessarily than Into the Spider-Verse, but because of the difference in tones, it works just the same. And I ended up enjoying it a whole lot in terms of the score itself. You have Oscar Isaac playing Miguel O'Hara. You have Jake Johnson back. You have Issa Rae as Jessica Drew. You have so many, different actors come in here, some of whom we've seen before and some of who are new, that it's kind of intense to watch, because you're always trying to pick apart the frame and notice different things. And it's so hard when you're watching something for the first time. You kind of lose track of the story at times. And it's not a bad thing. It's just your mind starts to wonder, wait, was that just, oh, it was? Or, wait, did they just do that there? They did. And so it's one of those things where you kind of have to be like on your toes at all times and really kind of soaking in everything on the frame. Daniel Kaluuya does amazing here as Hobie. Really great work. Definitely got the most audience reaction out of our screening. And I would be remiss to say, too, by the time this film ended and the credits were rolling, our theater audience was clapping. And I haven't heard clapping in a movie theater in literal years. I think the last time that I saw that much enthusiasm for a movie was, in fact, Endgame. So still within the superhero kind of realm. However, it felt, you had, that was, I'm going to be honest, it was adults clapping in Endgame, you had a mix of adults and kids clapping in our screening. And this was, Thursday night, primetime, 7 p.m. showing IMAX. And it really made the film experience all that much better, because, you're enjoying it. Everyone's having a good time. There are a lot of laughs, a lot of moments to kind of pick apart, like I mentioned. The score and the soundtrack is on point at all times. Voice acting impeccable. And it really becomes this culmination of, this is cinema, right? There's been this conversation in discourse lately regarding animation. And a lot of it comes from the general audience members, right? We often think of animation as stories that are told for children. Well, you had Guillermo del Toro talk about this not long ago. I don't know if it was either at the Golden Globes or I believe it was at the Academy Awards, the 95th Academy Awards, where he had mentioned that animated stories are not just for kids. They're for the world. They're for everyone. And this could not be more true of a statement when we're talking about something like Across the Spider-Verse, which I think is incredible. So I would encourage you to go out and see it. I know that early box office tracking pegged it at the second highest premiere for an animated film ever, I think behind The Incredibles 2, where they go thematically and story-wise in this film. I could see 10 more of these. I'm going to be honest. I could watch 10 more over the course of the next 15 years. I don't think there would ever be a time, if they keep pushing the bounds of animation, if they keep pushing the bounds of storytelling, if they keep pushing the bounds of what it means to be a hero, what it means to be Spider-Man, I think that's really thematically rich, and you really can't go wrong and can't misstep. If you're constantly bringing that same level of attention to detail and attention to character and attention to style. Because I think this is a film where style is just as important as story. And we often talk about that as creatives, and as fans of anything, television, filmmaking, gaming. It really is always a question of style over substance. Which one? And for a lot of projects, it means giving up one for the other, but it doesn't have to, right? And that's what Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse has shown us. You don't have to trade one for the other. You can have both style and substance. And that's what I love about Across the Spider-Verse. So you should definitely go check it out. Hopefully you enjoyed that little rant, non-spoiler review of Across the Spider-Verse. For me, it's about equal with the first. I think that it excels in some ways, and then it kind of is, I don't want to say held back by its own ambitions, but it sometimes might feel like that. And I think that's just because of the scope of the multiverse. The multiverse kind of plays a big part in feeling some type of unsatisfaction from it. Not that you feel unsatisfied, but that maybe it's not complete. But it definitely is. It's definitely a complete story through and through. So